Thank you, Luke. Yeah, the dog thing, perfect, right? So somebody comes to the door, the dog barks, they go away. They do their job every single day, right? It's just um, so. Real Foundations, we're a professional services firm. We focus on real estate companies, investors, developers, operators, and occupiers. And although many of you aren't in real estate, you're all living, working, or shopping in real estate. We kind of need it to live human life the way we live it these days. So we've got about 400 people around the world. And I'll say first, so you can locate us. We run our business on Teams, and I'll tell you three things as we go through this in the next 10 minutes or so. The first is our view about the digital work paradigm. And we've been at this for 10 years. It's not just a COVID thing. And we have evolved with a lot of trial and error and now believe that this really is a paradigm shift, that you need to get to think differently about the minute by minute ways that you work. And I'll talk a bit about that, and then we'll talk about this particular team and give you a little bit more information about that. This was fascinating, by the way, because when Swoop asked permission, we said, sure, we'd be happy to be part of this. And then when they gave us feedback, we were the several teams that we had that they'd picked out were not intuitive or obvious to me. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then finally, just some of the basic practical tips that we promote as leading practices inside RF. Because we are at the opposite end. Lori mentioned that 28 times number of chats than channel messages. I think we're the reverse of that. Most of our messaging occurs in channels. And I think we had an advantage because we started before the pandemic, before video. The one good news for me about the pandemic is I no longer have to tell people to turn their videos on. For 5 or 6 years, I was constantly telling people, turn your video on, turn your video on. And I don't have to do that anymore. So the first thing, the paradigm, fairly early, we started using Yammer before Yammer was purchased by Microsoft, because we had an inkling 10 years ago that what we were starting to see with Facebook, like, can't we somehow use that inside our business? Can't we get people with that more free-flowing kind of transmission of information, less like directed message? Can't we get people like engaging in conversations around topics? And so we did a bunch of silly things like try to use Google Plus, and we ended up with Yammer before it was purchased by Microsoft. And in a way, it tracks back to what Laurie said earlier about Humana, where they rolled this out with channels, which is the opposite of what most people have done in the last 16 months, where they roll out video and chat. We sort of started with channels too, because we started in Yammer. The things after the first year or two that dawned on us was that Yammer wasn't an application. It wasn't a tool. It was a place. And that was kind of, it's simple to say, but it was like hugely important to getting us over this paradigm shift. That work happens in places. We use tools to do work, but the meaning of work comes from the places and the people we do that work with. And so that Yammer was a digital place. So I think we were primed when it came along. We started using it instantly in its private preview, and we've been telling Microsoft we're one of the most intense per capita users teams in the world. And we think of Teams as a place, not as a tool. And there's a distinct value to the Yammer place. It is where people at our firm go to learn or share information about a topic of interest to them or to the firm. It's like the digital water cooler, like the digital bulletin board. And Teams is the place you go to do focused work with a defined group of people with defined goals in a defined time period. And while both are message-based, those are distinctly different places. Like, you can go do work at Starbucks, you can do work in a cube, you can do work in a hotel lobby, but those are different places. And so the big part, and this would be a practical recommendation, anybody trying to like accelerate the usage See what happens when you just stop using the word tool and use the word place instead. All sorts of things I think open up in people's minds because we're all used to doing work in multiple places. And the tool thing immediately confuses people. So this is the first big thing, big users of Yammer. Everybody in the firm uses Yammer. Everybody in the firm uses Teams. I do not get email messages from anybody else at Real Foundations. I'll let that sink in because that sounds impossible to many people. I do not get email messages from anybody else inside Real Foundations. I do still get email messages, but where 5 years ago I might get 500 a day that mattered, today I might get 25. Leaving aside all the junk, which is filtered out. But I still get the other 475 messages, but 75 to 100 are in Yammer, and the rest of them are in Teams. So just as the sort of starting point to show you how far into this we are, we believe that this is an ecosystem that we are inhabiting. It is not a tool, and it's not a set of apps. We've made a choice to live our work lives in this ecosystem. So going from that context then to this particular team on the next slide, Luke, the team that bubbled out is the team used by our executive committee. So the four of us who run the firm, and this is where we run the firm. We are collaborative by disposition. We do consulting and managed services. So we're not in a command and control profession. We have to listen or we wouldn't be in business. And so I am nominally the CEO, but if you ask the other three, they would say that doesn't mean very much, other than I'm the one who's supposed to do these things rather than them. And I'll focus on one thing, the 80%. It's funny, this time slice, we had one of our founders who retired a year ago. He's still on our board, so he's still in this team. So the one person who was not active of the 4 out of 5 actually retired in March of 2020. So we really have 100%, and you'll see some interesting things, I think. This is not driven by me. You'll see a whole bunch of posts from any one of the 4 of us. You will see a ton of replies and likes on posts, and you'll see very rapid response. And you also see, I think at the bottom right, which is essential to the whole ecosystem argument, all 4 of us are very active in a whole bunch of other teams and a bunch of other channels. So this just happens to be the one that we interact with each other about a specific set of decisions and topics and late breaking news. I wouldn't have, as I said before, I wouldn't have immediately thought that this is the team that would have popped up. But once I see it, it makes a lot of sense. And the other thing about this, the data here and why we've been using Swoop for a long time, is we recognized early that in order to accelerate acceptance of this paradigm shift, we needed to measure things. And I'll come back to that at the very end, but we have made the measurement of participation first in Yammer and now in Teams and SharePoint, a very integral part of how we talk to people about shaping a career inside our firm. So fascinating to us that this came out in this way, and now that we see it, we can't unsee it, and it makes a lot of sense. It's for people who are very collaborative, who pay attention to each other, and never email each other, never text message each other outside of Teams. So the next slide. So here are some practical things every day. The picture on the right is our view of the M365 ecosystem. And you'll note in the middle, we talk about this small collection of places, place where you go hang out, place where you'll leave your screen there and see what's going on. Teams is the most important of those, but we still use Outlook. We use Yammer a lot. SharePoint is our internal intranet, et cetera. And then we've got a bunch of tools that you can pick up increasingly in any one of those half dozen places
to perform work. So that's our internal view of how we see the M365 ecosystem. The number one leading practice for us, and we work at this every week and we nudge people, is to have conversations in Teams channels, not in chat. And so I maybe once a week will, you'd have to ask them. I think encourage, they might say chide people to, something gets started and it becomes knowledge rich. And I said, let's move this to this channel with this team. And so I've become quite good at myself doing cut and pasting and redirecting of messages and encouraging others to do those too. We make a big deal about using @mentions. If you want somebody's specific attention, @mention them. We need to break the game of the copying somebody on email late at night so you hope they don't notice, but you have plausible deniability later. So the @mention is a thing we use all the time. I use it to manage my work in Teams. I pay attention to the little red dots all the time. We look at the replies to posts and the how fast people reply, and we measure and monitor that. We have gotten very used to having files located near the work. So we have, I believe, broken for 400 people the idea that I need to go to my special secret store of deeply nested files to find things. And people have gotten used to finding the files in the teams and in the channels where those files originate. I think we did a study 7 years ago. The number of versions of a single file wasn't that easy to do. We did a sample. We had, I think, an average of 17. A file with somebody's initials and a date and time at the end of it. We had about 17 for each file. Today we're below 2. So we're not at 1 yet, but we're very close. We've eliminated almost all of those. Which one of these is current, and is this the one I worked on last? By getting people to work on the files right where they're doing all the other work. We use tabs a lot, both to just simple things like a particular library that has consistently used information. And we have pushed the task ecosystem across 365 with Planner and To Do, and are all over each of the new task creation points. So if you haven't spotted it yet, you can now create a task from a message in Teams. And we do all of our meetings in Teams. And we do increasingly use the record and feature and have a model for how we document team meetings. So those are 7 things that we find useful. We work at them every day and every week. And once you get there, I don't think you'd find a single person at RealFoundations who would go back to living their work life in email on a regular basis. And the last one, Luke, just to give you a sense of, this is the dashboard. So we're 2/3 of our business is consulting and the other third is managed services. So we bill hours, right? So this is the dashboard we actually use as we measure our people every 6 months. So we've got the projects they work on, we have their utilization in the period, the number of other hours they manage, the revenue, that kind of stuff. You'll notice at the bottom left, there's a whole section on Work Out Loud, and this is powered by Swoop. We measure the activity in Teams and Yammer of every person in the firm. Those measurements are published to them. They can see where they stand. And we talk about this when we talk about each person's review. It's part of their career planning. If they're not in a good spot, if there are specific actions we expect them to take, and we measure change in that over time. It's a very, very important part of how we run the business, how we are capturing knowledge for future people in the business. And in order to make it clear that it's important, we measure that and manage performance against that. So I think it's a quick recap. We run our business on Teams. We recognize that's not easy to get people across that divide. And this notion of thinking of this as an ecosystem of places rather than a kit of tools in a toolbox, I think is helpful in getting that paradigm
shift across. So I'll turn it back over to you, Lou.